The Island Realm and the Shadow Pirates. A calm, magical pirate adventure about courage, fear, and holding the wheel. Welcome to the Safe Den. The Safe Den is a place for children, young people, and adults who sometimes need somewhere gentle to land. A place where you do not have to be perfect. A place where you do not have to be strong all the time. A place where you are allowed to be exactly as you are. This story is about Oliver, who sails into the island realm, meets pirates, dinosaurs, strange islands, and his own fear. And he discovers that courage does not mean never shaking. Courage means holding the wheel anyway. The Island Realm and the Shadow Pirates. At night, just when sleep begins to make the blanket heavy and the thoughts light, there is a place far out in Dreamland that not everyone finds right away. That place is called the Island Realm. And the Island Realm is not just one island. No, it is many islands. Islands lying like glowing secrets in a dark blue sea. Islands with different smells, colors, sounds, and mysteries. Some have palm trees and hidden treasure caves. Some have towering ferns and dinosaur footprints in the mud. Some have cliffs where the water sprays silver in the moonlight, and some have old lighthouses that blink as if they know something they are not quite ready to reveal. And on this particular night, Oliver arrived there. He did not know how he had found the way. People rarely knew that in Dreamland. You did not simply fall asleep and wake up there. You slipped closer. You drifted toward it. As if the night quietly took your hand and whispered, "Come, there is something you need to see over here." Oliver stood on an old wooden pier. The boards beneath his feet were warm, even though the night air felt cool. Around the posts of the harbor, tiny blue fish glowed from below like living lanterns. Ropes creaked softly against the masts of the little boats, and all the way at the end of the pier, a ship rocked gently on the water. It was clearly waiting for him. The ship was not enormous, but it was not ordinary either. Its hull was dark and smooth, like wet chestnut wood. The front of the ship was carved into the head of a sea creature, but with friendly eyes and a crooked little grin. The sail was deep green, with stars sewn into the cloth, and along the railing hung tiny brass bells that gave the smallest chime whenever the wind touched them. By the gangplank stood a man with a beard, like salt and moonlight. He wore a blue coat with copper buttons, a rolled map under one arm, and a hat with a feather in it. The feather looked as if it had come from a bird that had once flown straight through the sunset. "You are a little late," the man said. "Am I?" asked Oliver. "Yes," said the man, "but only exactly late enough that you can still reach what matters." Oliver did not know what that meant, but it sounded like something you did not have to answer right away. "Who are you?" Oliver asked. "I am harbor keeper, map guardian, night compass holder, and lender of ships," said the man. "But most people simply call me Captain Moonknot." He bowed a little. "Is this ship mine?" Oliver asked. "Only for tonight," said Captain Moonknot. "In Dreamland, we borrow things. We borrow winds, adventures, and courage. But some things do not have to belong to us before we are allowed to use them." Oliver looked out across the water. Far away, he could see islands. One island had tall palms, black-green rocks, and torches along the beach. Another was thick with jungle, enormous ferns, and glowing footprints between the trees. A third island shone with metal and gears. A fourth held a bay of red sails and cannon cliffs. And behind them all, more islands lay in the distance like shadows with golden edges. "Is that the whole island realm?" Oliver asked. "Only a small part," said Captain Moonknot. "Dreamland never shows everything at once." He handed Oliver a rolled-up map. It was drawn on dark blue paper, and the lines glowed faintly silver as if someone had drawn them with moonlight ink. Around the edges, tiny ink octopuses and seahorses swam in place, looking as though they might tell stories if Oliver held the map long enough. Oliver unrolled it. It was huge. There were names written across the islands: Pirate Cove, Dinosaur Island, Machine Island, the Giant Crab Coast, the Treasure Grotto, the Storm Strait. And in the middle of the map, as if someone had not been sure whether to write it down or not, there were slightly crooked letters that said, "Beware the Shadow Pirates." Oliver looked up. "The Shadow Pirates?" he asked. Captain Moonknot nodded, not in a dramatic way, more in the way someone nods when something is serious but not hopeless. "They do not come every night," he said. But when they do, it is often because someone has carried a little too much fear into sleep. Oliver became very still. He thought about the day, about recess, and the older boys who had shouted so loudly over a football that something in his stomach had tied itself into a knot. About the classroom, where the teacher had said his name out loud and everyone had looked up. About a dark room at home that still felt a little too dark. About the feeling that sometimes he wanted to be brave immediately, but instead something inside him became stiff first. "So they are made of fear?" Oliver asked. "Of the fear we did not quite get to look at properly during the day," said Captain Moonknot. "Can you fight them?" Captain Moonknot pushed his hat back a little. "That depends what you mean by fight." Oliver was not completely sure. "I guess I mean, can you win against them?" "Yes," said Captain Moonknot, "but rarely in the way people think." He pointed to the ship. "Come. The island realm will not wait all night." Oliver stepped aboard. As soon as his foot touched the deck, the ship gave a small, satisfied sway, as if it had hoped it would be him. "This ship is called the Starbiter," said Captain Moonknot, "not because it bites stars, more because it sails so close beneath them that it almost looks that way." He handed Oliver a small compass. It was round, copper-colored, and surprisingly warm in his hand. The needle was not just a needle, it was a tiny silver swordfish, turning and pointing. "It does not point north," said the captain. "It points toward what you are ready for." That sounded exciting, and also a little annoying. "Can it not just point toward Pirate Cove?" Oliver asked. Captain Moonknot smiled. "It rarely does anything that boring." The Starbiter glided away from the harbor almost without a sound. The water parted like dark silk around the bow, and the bells along the railing chimed softly, like secret bubbles of laughter. Oliver stood by the wheel while Captain Moonknot watched him. The moon was large and round, but not completely white. It was slightly golden, as if it had borrowed color from every island it shone upon. First, they sailed past Machine Island. Small wheels spun in the sand like mechanical beetles, and enormous gears stood half buried in the shore. Steam crabs toddled about on copper legs, their shells clicking gently as they bumped into one another. On the beach stood a row of little cannon carts, but when Oliver looked closely, they seemed mostly built to shoot confetti and clouds of stardust. Farther inland, giant cranes lifted glowing pieces of something into the air. It looked like a great building place, as if the island itself was being made and remade by machines that worked through the night. "They look strong," Oliver said. "They are," said Captain Moonknot, "but strength is not only in iron." Then came Dinosaur Island. Oliver gasped. The island was covered in jungle so green it almost glowed. Ferns stood higher than houses, and between them Oliver could see enormous footprints filled with rainwater and starlight. Somewhere among the trees came a deep roar. It was not angry, not hungry, just enormous. Then something moved behind the treetops. A long neck rose up slowly, a gigantic dinosaur. Oliver did not know exactly what kind it was, but it was definitely very large, with a long neck, a long tail, and a patient, ancient way of blinking. He could not help smiling. "Are we going in there?" Oliver asked. "If the night wants us to," said Captain Moonknot. Then the wind tightened. The compass in Oliver's hand trembled. The tiny swordfish needle spun quickly and pointed toward a dark channel between two islands. Captain Moonknot's face became serious. "The Storm Strait," he said. "Is that where they are?" Oliver asked. "Yes," said the captain. The sea ahead was not wild yet, but it was changing. The small waves grew a little higher, and the darkness on the water thickened, as if someone had poured ink into it. The air no longer smelled only of salt and night. Now it also smelled a little like cellars, nervous hands, and words that had not been said. "I do not really like this," said Oliver. "Good," said Captain Moonknot. "Good?" "Yes," said the captain. "That means you are feeling truly—" Then the fog came. It rolled across the water in long grey ribbons. Not ordinary fog. This fog was full of shapes that almost looked like faces, but not quite. Voices murmured inside it. "You cannot. What if? You do not dare. Be careful. Too late." Oliver gripped the railing harder, and then they came. At first he saw only the sails, black sails, like wings from enormous night bats. Then the ship appeared out of the fog. It was large, much larger than the Starbiter. Its hull was dark as wet coal, and along its sides were cannons shaped like open mouths. At the top of the tallest mast fluttered a flag with a skull on it. But the skull was not smiling. It looked almost worried. On the deck stood pirates, not quite real pirates, shadow pirates. Their coats seemed sewn from fog. Their boots were made of wet night. Their eyes glowed pale, like moons seen through rain. Some had hooks, some wore triangular hats, some carried spyglasses, as if searching for things children were afraid to lose. At the front stood their captain. He was tall and thin, with a cloak that moved like smoke, and a hat with a black feather as long as a raven's wing. He raised his sword. "Stop!" he shouted. His voice was like a rope being pulled too tight. No one sails through the storm strait without paying the fear toll. Oliver's stomach sank. "What is a fear toll?" he whispered. Captain Moonknot answered, without taking his eyes off the shadow captain. "It is when they try to make you hand over your courage before you realize you have any." The shadow captain lifted his hand. The cannons turned. "Give us your courage," he called. "Give us your light. Give us your will to sail on." "No," Oliver shouted, before he even had time to think. The ships rocked. The fog drew back like a curtain. And then the battle began. The first cannon did not shoot fire. It fired a huge black ball of ink and crashing waves. It hit the water in front of the Starbiter and burst into a cloud of whispering words. "You will sink. You cannot do this. Turn back." Oliver stepped backward. "The wheel," said Captain Moonknot. Oliver grabbed it. The Starbiter turned just in time, and the next black cannonball sliced through the water beside them, splashing cold darkness across the deck. "We cannot win against them," Oliver shouted. Captain Moonknot tossed him a long brass spyglass. "Look properly," said the captain. Oliver lifted the spyglass to his eye. Suddenly, the shadow pirates looked different. Their cannonballs were not just cannonballs. They were days that had grown too large. A laugh that had sounded wrong, a dark room, a stupid comment, a feeling of being small. "They are shooting with things you already know," said Captain Moonknot. "They cannot invent anything new. That is their weakness." "Then what do we do?" Oliver asked. "We sail," said the captain, "in the middle of a battle." "Especially in the middle of a battle." Oliver turned the Starbiter toward a narrow opening between two cliffs. The shadow pirate's ship followed with heavy waves and black sails. They rushed between two tall stone pillars that glittered like wet silver in the moonlight. Rope ferns stretched overhead from cliff to cliff, like bridges made by the jungle itself. On the other side, the sea opened toward the giant crab coast. Great sandbanks lay in crescent shapes, and the rocks were shaped like shells and shields. Across the beach scurried moon crabs. Not tiny crabs, crabs large enough to carry a saddle if anyone were ever brave or silly enough to try. Their shells shimmered in copper, turquoise, and deep purple. "Toward the shore," shouted Captain Moonknot. "We will run aground," Oliver cried. "Exactly," said Captain Moonknot. It sounded like a terrible plan, but Oliver did it anyway. The Starbiter slid into the shallow water. The great ship of the shadow pirates came after them and stuck fast with a deep, ugly scrape. The whole black ship tilted. Pirates rolled across the deck like little toy soldiers that had been lined up too neatly and then bumped by a careless hand. One of them lost his hat, and it flew away like an angry bat. "Now!" shouted the captain. He pulled a rope, and 3 little cannons folded out from the side of the Starbiter. They were decorated with stars and golden edges. "Are we shooting back now?" Oliver asked. "Yes," said Captain Moonknot, "but properly." The captain lowered the fuse stick. The cannons boomed. Not with darkness, but with glittering sea spheres that exploded in stardust and clear water. The shadow pirates coughed, stumbled, and became a little transparent. Oliver felt a warm, wild joy bubble inside him. "We did it!" "A little," said Captain Moonknot. "Look up." Something came rushing through the air above them. At first, Oliver thought it was a large bird. But no, it was a boy. A boy who was flying. Not very high, just high enough to cut across the masts like a dark shape against the glowing sky. His arms moved calmly, almost as if he was talking to the wind. He drifted downward, then lifted again, as if the air itself had agreed to help him. He glided so close past the shadow pirate's ropes that he cut one loose with his hand. One of the black sails fell over half the deck like an enormous angry tablecloth. The boy waved quickly and winked. Not proudly, just like someone passing through another dream, helping for a brief moment because help was needed. Then he drifted away across the sea, carried by the wind, and disappeared toward the distant islands. Oliver stood with his mouth open. "Was that—" "Yes," said Captain Moonknot. "Some learn to sail, some learn to fly. In Dreamland, we help one another when we can." The shadow captain tore the fallen sail away and shouted, "Forward to Dinosaur Island! We take the shortcut through the roaring forest." His ship twisted free of the sandbank with a black splash and came after them again. The chase continued. The Starbiter raced onward with wind in its sail. Dinosaur Island came closer and closer until they sailed into a river mouth between huge reddish cliffs. The water turned dark green beneath the jungle shadows. The air here was thick with scents. Wet leaves, warm bark, moss, far-off rain, something old, heavy, and alive. The sounds changed too. Branches cracked, giant leaves rustled, a deep rumbling moved somewhere behind the trees. Water dripped from vines as thick as ropes. "I do not think pirates should come in here," Oliver whispered. "I do not think so either," said Captain Moonknot. Then came a roar, not angry, not hungry, but so large that the whole river trembled. The jungle opened. Out between the ferns came a dinosaur, not the long-necked one from before. This one was smaller, but still enormous. It had a dark green back, amber eyes, and little glowing markings along its sides, as if someone had painted lightning on it with moonlight. Around its neck hung vines and flowers, so it looked both like a king and a little bit silly. The shadow pirates froze. The dinosaur looked at them, then at Oliver, then at the black ship, and then it slammed its tail into the water. A wave rolled through the river like a small sea and pushed the shadow pirate's ship sideways into a wide mudbank, where it stuck fast almost to the mast. Again the pirates slipped and tumbled across the deck while their captain shouted orders no one really heard. Oliver began to laugh, not because anyone was in danger now, but because everything was so huge and wild and strange and alive that the laughter simply arrived by itself. "Thank you," he called to the dinosaur. The dinosaur blinked slowly, as if it was used to helping children in dreams. Then it turned back toward the jungle and walked away with calm, heavy steps. "We are almost out of it," said Oliver. But Captain Moonknot did not answer. He stared toward the mouth of the river, where the fog was beginning to gather again. "No," he said softly. "Now comes the difficult part." At the river's mouth, the shadow captain was waiting. Not his ship, only him. He stood on the water as if the darkness held him up. His cloak moved, his hat sat like a black bird, and his sword shone with a dull light. "You can hide behind dinosaurs and sandbanks," he said, "but you still sail with fear inside you." Oliver's hands turned cold. Because it was true. There was still fear in him. Fear of dark rooms, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of turning off the light, fear of being laughed at, fear of not being brave enough. The shadow captain lifted his sword. "Give it to me," he said. "Then you will not have to feel it." Oliver looked down. It almost sounded nice. To let go. To stop feeling. To stop being afraid. Captain Moonknot placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder. "Careful," he said. "That is his oldest trick." "What trick?" asked Oliver, making it sound as if never feeling fear again would be freedom. Oliver swallowed. "Then what do I do?" "You stand firm," said Captain Moonknot, "and you feel that courage is not the same as having no fear." The sea trembled, the air glowed, and then something happened. Far out between the islands, the darkness opened like a curtain. Tiny lanterns lit one by one on the water. A boat appeared. No, several boats. First came one small boat with a quiet light in its bow. Then a taller boat that looked like a floating treehouse, with branches for masts. Then a narrow boat gliding so silently it might have been made of reflection. Between them, a figure walked on a narrow bridge of light across the water. It looked like a girl. She was not very big, but she walked as if she knew that even dark water could carry the right step. Around her shoulders was a cloak like night blue cloth sewn with silver threads. In one hand she carried a lantern, in the other a key that glimmered in a strange and gentle way. On her back hung a small flute, and behind her came the old beings of Dreamland. Rumble, with leaves in his hat and a very serious expression. The mirror keeper, still and bright as water. Holdfast, like a whole little forest in himself. Unease, the owl, wide-winged and awake, and Swallow, flashing like a streak of wind around them. "The Dream Apprentice," whispered Captain Moonknot. The girl stopped on the bridge of light and looked toward the shadow captain. "You take up a lot of space," she said. "That is what fear does," he hissed. "Only when it is not seen properly." She lifted the lantern. The light grew, not sharp, not blinding, just warm, clear and wide. The shadow captain drew back a little, as if something in the light hurt him, and as if he knew what it really was. "It is not enough," he shouted. "No," said the girl, "not alone." She turned toward Oliver. "You have to do the rest." "Me?" shouted Oliver. "But you are—" "A dream apprentice," she said, "not a rescue machine." Rumble nodded eagerly. "Important difference," he said. Oliver looked at the shadow captain. He still looked frightening, large, dark, and full of voices. "I do not know what to do," said Oliver. The mirror keeper lifted her shining bowl. "Look," she said. Oliver looked, and suddenly the captain appeared different, not like a monster, but like everything Oliver had been trying to push away. A shout on the football field, a name spoken aloud in class, a dark room, a light turning off, a tightening stomach, a thought that said, "Do not try, go away." Oliver breathed, and then he understood, at least a little. "You are not the whole sea," Oliver said to the shadow captain. "You are only what I was afraid of today." The shadow captain staggered back. "I am bigger than that," he said. "No," said Oliver, "you only become bigger when I do not look at you properly." Holdfast lifted his branch arms. Unease spread her wings. Swallow circled high above them. The dream apprentice held the lantern still. Oliver stepped all the way to the bow of the Starbiter. His knees shook a little, but he stayed standing. "I am still afraid," he said out loud, "but I am sailing on anyway." Everything became completely silent. And then it happened. The shadow captain's cloak began to flutter like loose fog. His hat became smaller, so small that it looked as if it pinched his ears. His sword turned into a long dark reed. The glowing eyes blinked once, and suddenly there was no great fear captain standing on the water. Only a small shadow figure. It looked more tired than dangerous. "I only wanted you to turn back," it mumbled. "I know," said Oliver. The dream apprentice stepped forward and placed her key against the air. A door of light appeared above the sea. She opened it. Behind the door was not a prison. It was a quiet little room filled with blue light, where dark things could become smaller until someone was ready to meet them again. "Here," she said gently. The little shadow figure looked at Oliver. Then it nodded, almost too slightly to see, and went inside. The door closed slowly behind it. The darkness on the sea lifted. The waves became deep blue again. The stars returned. The islands around them shone brighter, as if the whole island realm had been holding its breath and could finally breathe out. Oliver still stood at the bow. His heart was beating, but differently now. Not only with fear, also with something bright and large and warm. The dream apprentice looked at him. "There," she said, "now you know." "Know what?" asked Oliver. "That you can win without making everything disappear." Rumble sneezed a leaf over the railing. "That is actually the most annoying and most important rule in Dreamland," he said. Oliver smiled. "Are you the Dream Master?" he asked the girl. She shrugged lightly. "Only on the way." "Can someone become one?" asked Oliver. "Yes," she said, "but first you have to be an apprentice long enough to learn that magic is rarely bigger than the courage someone dares to use." Swallow swept above them. Unease let a low, calm call glide across the water. Holdfast stood in the boat like a small floating forest. The mirror keeper held her bowl, where the sea was now clear. Captain Moonknot came to stand beside Oliver. "You steered quite well," he said. "I was scared," said Oliver. "That is not what I said the captain. Oliver looked out over the island realm. Pirate Cove blinked in the distance with red torches. Dinosaur Island lay dark green and secret. Machine Island glowed with copper and stardust. And far away, almost impossible to see, he could glimpse a figure flying low over the sea. Someone still practicing, but already good enough to help others a little along the way. "Will I come back?" asked Oliver. "To the island realm?" said Captain Moonknot. "Yes, if the knight wants it, and if you remember that courage is not something you either have or do not have. It is something you sometimes borrow a little of, until you discover it was already living inside you." That sounded like a very grown-up answer to Oliver, but somehow he understood it anyway. The starbiter turned its nose homeward. As they sailed back through the calm water, Oliver could hear the islands whisper their own secret sounds. A dinosaur roar far away, a lighthouse bell, moon crabs rustling in the sand, a machine beetle tick-ticking itself to sleep, a laughing echo from Pirate Cove, now without darkness inside it. And far across the water, a few silly little princess toots from the castles where the little dragons were still playing hide-and-seek. When the harbour finally appeared again, it lay still and gently rocking in its sleep. Captain Moonknot took the wheel, and Oliver jumped onto the pier. "Was it only a dream?" he asked. The captain tilted his head and looked at him. "If something teaches you something, does it ever feel only like a dream?" Oliver thought about that. Then he shook his head. "Good night, Oliver," said Captain Moonknot. "Good night, Captain. And the next time you feel afraid in daylight, of dark rooms, loud voices, lights going out, or anything else that grows too large inside you, remember the storm strait." "The storm strait?" asked Oliver. "Yes," said Captain Moonknot. "Remember that you have sailed through it before." Then the ship drifted away from the pier and became a dark star on the water. The harbour, the islands, the lights, and the whole island realm slowly slipped into the soft background of sleep. Oliver woke in his bed. The blanket was still heavy and warm. The room was quiet. But something was different. Not that he would suddenly never be afraid again. Dark rooms might still feel dark. Loud shouts might still make his stomach spin. And it might still not feel nice when everyone looked at him in class. But now he knew something. Fear can look like a pirate ship in the night, and still be something you already know a little. Courage does not mean that you do not shake. Courage means holding the wheel anyway. And deep, deep inside himself, Oliver could still feel the sea from Dreamland, the island realm, the secret islands, the green sail, the dinosaurs' roar, the flying boy, the dream apprentice with the lantern, and the darkness that became smaller when someone finally looked at it properly. That evening, before he fell asleep again, Oliver closed his eyes and thought, "Maybe I will sail out there again." And somewhere far away, between water, stars, and secret islands, tiny bells chimed along a railing, as if someone was already preparing a ship once more. "Good night, sleep very well."